A whole packer brisket runs $60, $70 these days before a single stick of oak or the 12 hours it steals from your Saturday. Then you trim a third of it into the trash as fat and pray you didn't dry out the flat. But 3 cuts sit in that same meat case, all beef, all Texas, none of them over $30. And they come off the pit just as tender and just as smoky. And one is richer than any brisket you've tasted. They're what the old Central Texas market smoked before brisket ever wore the crown. Start with a fact the barbecue joints would rather you didn't dwell on. Brisket was never supposed to be expensive. For most of the last century, it was a junk cut, a tough slab of chest muscle butchers sold cheap because nobody knew what to do with it. The old German and Czech meat markets that built Texas barbecue, places like Kreutz Market and Smitty's in Lockhart, didn't make their name on brisket at all. They smoked shoulder clod, a big cheap hunk off the top of the shoulder, and they sold it sliced onto butcher paper with white bread and a knife chained to the table. Then, around the time Aaron Franklin had people lining up 4 hours deep in the Austin heat, brisket turned into a status symbol almost overnight. Demand went vertical. The price chased it straight up. And that is the part that should bother you. Every other tough, collagen-heavy cut that cooks the exact same way, that goes tender under the same slow smoke, just stayed cheap. Sitting right there in the case, waiting. So let's start with the one every backyard pitmaster already half knows about. It's called the poor man's brisket, and that nickname does it dirty because there is nothing poor about the way it eats. A chuck roast comes off the front shoulder, the part that spends all day holding the animal up, which means it's shot through with the same fat and the same tough connective tissue that makes brisket worth smoking in the first place. That connective tissue is collagen, and collagen is the entire game. Keep it in low heat long enough and it melts into gelatin, and gelatin is what coats every strand of beef and tricks your tongue into calling it tender. When you're at the counter, look for one with heavy white marbling running through it, a chuck eye roll or a nice thick blade roast, not the lean stringy stuff sold for pot roast. So what does it cost you? A 3-pound roast at a regular grocery store runs somewhere around $18 to $22, depending on where you live and what beef is doing that month. One roast under $25, enough to feed the whole family. And you cook it almost exactly like the $60 cut. Coat it in nothing fancier than coarse salt and cracked black pepper, the Dalmatian rub they have leaned on in Central Texas for 100 years. Get your smoker holding steady around 250 degrees, post oak if you can find it, and let the smoke go to work. It'll stall around 165, same as brisket, that maddening hour where the temperature just refuses to climb while the surface sweats off moisture. Wrap it in foil or butcher paper, push it back on, and pull it when a probe slides into the center like it's going through warm butter, right around 205. The whole cook runs 6, maybe 8 hours, not the 12 to 16 a full packer demands. You can throw a chuck roast on after breakfast and be pulling it apart before the game is over, with a dark, peppery bark on the outside and steam rolling off the middle. Now I'll be honest with you because the comments will be anyway. A chuck roast will not give you those long, pink-rimmed slices you see fanned across the tray at Franklin. It doesn't have the geometry for it. What it gives you instead is chopped beef, a pile of smoky, gelatin-slicked shreds you spoon onto a bun with a little sauce, some pickles, and raw onion. And if you have ever had a chopped beef sandwich at a real Texas joint and quietly thought it beat the brisket plate sitting next to it, now you know why. Half the time, that chopped beef started life as exactly this cut. That is the gateway, the one that proves the whole idea works. But the next cut is where you stop cooking a stand-in for brisket and start cooking something a lot of pit masters quietly rank above it: beef short ribs. If the chuck roast is brisket's understudy, the beef rib is the cut that walks on stage and makes you forget there was ever a lead. Drive out to Louis Miller Barbecue in Taylor, and the thing people photograph isn't the brisket. It's a single beef rib the size of your forearm, and it has been the star of that 100-year-old room for decades. These come off the rib and the chuck, big, meaty logs of beef sitting on top of a bone, and that bone is doing you two favors at once. It insulates the meat while it cooks, keeping it from drying out, and it leaks flavor into the surrounding beef the entire time. Pitmasters call a good one brisket on a stick, and they mean it as the highest praise they have. One thing you have to know before you buy, or you will throw your money away at the counter. There are two ways a butcher cuts these. English cut runs the knife between the bones, so you get a thick block of meat sitting on one bone, and that is exactly what you want. Flank cut runs the knife across the bones, giving you thin strips with little coins of bone through them, which is perfect for Korean galbi and useless for what we are doing. Ask for English cut, bone in, and you are set. The trendy version, those giant plate ribs that look like something off a cartoon dinosaur, have gotten expensive because every barbecue joint on Instagram started selling them at $10 a pound. But the humble chuck short rib right beside it in the case never got famous, and it never got pricey. $4, maybe $5 a pound. A rack that feeds 3 or 4 people for well under 30. You smoke them a little hotter than the chuck, around 275 degrees, salt and pepper again, and then you just wait for the fat to render. It's the one cut where you almost cannot overshoot the temperature. You take a beef rib far past anything you would dream of doing to a steak, up around 203, 205, until the meat between the bones goes soft and the whole rack jiggles when you shake it. That jiggle is the tell. That is rendered fat and melted collagen sloshing under a thick black pepper bark. And when you bite in, it is the beefiest thing you will ever pull off a pit. More beef flavor than a brisket. It is not close. This is where the brisket purists start typing, and I get it, brisket is a religion in this state. But ask any of them off the record which they would rather eat if money were no object and nobody was watching, and a surprising number will glance around the room first, and then admit it is the rib. Every single time. Which brings us to the last one, the cut I built this whole thing around. Beef cheeks, cachet de res. To understand why they belong at the very end and not somewhere in the middle, you have to go back further than brisket, further than the German meat markets, all the way down to the pit barbecues of South Texas. The cheek is the hardest working muscle on the whole animal because it never stops. Every hour of that cow's life, that muscle was chewing and grinding, and all that work packs it with more collagen per ounce than nearly any cut you can name. You already know what collagen does under low, slow heat. It surrenders. It turns to silk. Long before anyone in Texas was arguing about brisket, families across South Texas and northern Mexico were digging pits into the ground, filling them with mesquite coals, wrapping a whole cow's head in maguey leaves, and burying it to cook overnight. Barbacoa de cabeza. They'd unearth it on Sunday morning, and the richest, most prized meat on that entire head came out of the cheeks. This was never a menu item somebody dreamed up for a restaurant. Families have cooked barbacoa for Sunday breakfast for generations, and the cheek was always the treasure sitting in the middle of the pit. The part that gets people is the price. Those cheeks that whole families used to fight over at the table cost almost nothing at the counter today. $5, $6 a pound. 2 of them, enough to feed a table full of people, comes in under $20. You can smoke them low, around 250 degrees, or do what the old tradition does and wrap them with onion, garlic, and a couple of dried chilies so they braise down in their own juices. Either way, you carry them up past 200 degrees until a fork doesn't slide in so much as vanish. What you pull out barely holds together. Denser than brisket, glossier, almost buttery. So rich you find yourself eating it in smaller bites than you plan to. You lay it across a warm corn tortilla with a little raw onion, some cilantro, a squeeze of lime, and somewhere around the second bite, you understand exactly why this was the meat worth digging a pit in the ground for. Add a spoon of salsa roja, and it is a taco a $60 brisket plate cannot touch for a fraction of the price. A brisket asks for 12 hours, $60, and a prayer. A pair of beef cheeks asks for $20 in an afternoon and hands you the single richest bite of beef in the whole Texas tradition, the oldest one in it too. The cheap cut was the good cut the entire time. We just spent 50 years staring past it at the one with better marketing. Texas BBQ built its whole reputation on taking the cuts nobody else wanted and making them worth standing in line for. That was the trick. Then it let one of those cuts get so famous it priced itself right out of the tradition that saved it. Chuck roast, beef rib, cheek. All three under $30, everyone cooked over the same oak fire with nothing but salt, pepper, and patience. So before your next brisket, ask what that $60 is really buying. The beef or the story somebody wrapped around it? This weekend, buy the cheek instead, just the cheek. Then come tell me if it converted you, because I have watched that one bite turn a lifelong brisket loyalist quiet.